What if I told you the world's most peaceful drink, tea, was built on lies, espionage, smuggling, and economic warfare? What if I told you Britain didn't discover India's tea, they forced it into existence? This is the story of how Britain engineered one of the biggest economic takeovers in human history, using addiction, coercion, and tea. China had something Britain couldn't live without: tea. Smooth, calming, elegant, but brutally expensive. And the Chinese wanted only one thing in return: silver. By the late 1700s, Britain was bleeding silver faster than it could dig it up. So the British asked the question every empire asks eventually: why pay for what we can steal or force? Enter Bengal. Enter the East India Company. Enter opium, the weapon Britain would use to reverse the trade. Opium poured into China, Chinese silver poured into British hands, and tea, hundreds of tons of it, sailed back to London. But there was one flaw in Britain's plan. China hated them for it. Trade tensions were rising. The Qing dynasty was cracking down. Britain could feel the walls closing in. They needed another source of tea, a place they could control completely, and their eyes turned to India. But there was one massive problem. India didn't grow tea. Yet. At the time, most Europeans believed tea only grew in China, a gift of their climate, soil, and ancient wisdom. British botanists tried, and failed, to grow tea in India for decades. Then came one moment that rewrote history. 1823, Assam, India. Two Scottish explorers claim they found wild tea plants growing naturally. This discovery set Britain on fire. But here's the twist most textbooks skip. Assam tribes had used tea for centuries. Britain just didn't believe them. British scientists rushed to the region. They plucked leaves, crushed them, brewed them, and realized this was real tea. Strong, bitter, powerful, a perfect competitor to China's monopoly. Britain didn't hesitate. Within months, India's land was surveyed. Laws were drafted. Workers were recruited, which really meant coerced, trapped with debt, or misled with fake contracts. Tea wasn't just a crop. It was the start of an empire within an empire. But Britain wasn't done. They needed one more thing: total control over India's tea economy. Tea plantations didn't just appear. They required workers, thousands of them. But no one wanted to work in the deadly terrain of Assam. So the British engineered a new system: indenture, debt contracts, legalized entrapment. Agents roamed Indian villages, promising good wages, clean housing, easy work. Reality? Men and women were marched to remote plantations. Many never returned. British records bragged about discipline. Plantation workers called it something else: slavery without the name. The rules were brutal. Leaving the plantation was illegal. Beatings were common. Wages were withheld. Medical care barely existed. Families were separated. Death rates were horrific. But Britain kept expanding. By the mid-1800s, tea wasn't just an agricultural project, it was a machine. A machine feeding London, Liverpool, Manchester, all obsessed with cheap tea. Indian tea had become one of Britain's most profitable exports. China finally had enough. The First Opium War erupted, and Britain realized something terrifying. If China cuts us off, our tea culture collapses. But Britain had spent the last decade preparing for this exact scenario. Indian tea was ready. The empire flipped a switch, and the world shifted overnight. Indian tea flooded British markets. Prices crashed. Demand skyrocketed. Chinese tea lost its dominance. By the late 1800s, India was producing almost half of Britain's tea supply. And this was no accident. It was design, strategy, imperial engineering. The British Empire didn't simply develop Indian tea, they built it on the ruins of Chinese resistance and on the backs of Indian labor. Here's the irony. Tea, India's new empire-strengthening export, was never originally part of Indian culture in this way. But Britain? They turned it into their national identity. Tea breaks, tea etiquette, tea taxes, tea as a symbol of Britishness, all powered by Indian soil. Picture a London family in 1890 sipping a hot cup. They have no idea where it came from, who grew it, who died producing it, or how it became British in the first place. Tea wasn't just a drink. It was the taste of empire, infused with violence, addiction, and forced labor. So the next time someone says, tea is so British, remember, Britain didn't discover tea. They took it, engineered it, and forced India into becoming the world's tea factory.